The heat of mercy. Eleanor Cross had walked 12 miles through Montana heat with a dying child in her arms, and now she stood in Miller's general store begging for mercy she would never receive. Her daughter Maya's lips were cracked and bleeding, her small body limp against Eleanor's shoulder, and every person in that store turned their faces away like she carried plague instead of poverty. When Jacob Miller told her to get out, his voice loud enough for the whole town to hear, Eleanor understood that this was how it ended. Not with violence or drama, but with a mother watching her child fade, while good Christian people looked elsewhere. Then she heard the horse stop behind her in the street. If you're watching from anywhere in this world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Eleanor and Maya's story travels. And if their journey moves you, hit that like button and stay until the very end, because what happens next will change everything. The sun had no mercy in its arsenal that July afternoon. It hung over the Montana territory like a judge who'd already passed sentence, baking the rutted main street until the dust itself seemed to shimmer with heat. Eleanor felt every step through the thin soles of her boots. Boots that had carried her from Wyoming through 3 territories and too many towns that all looked exactly like this one. Desperate, hardscrabble, unwelcoming. Maya's weight against her shoulder had changed over the past week. The child who once squirmed and protested when held too long now hung motionless, her breathing shallow and rapid. 5 years old and already learning that hunger was just another fact of existence, like heat or thirst, or the way doors closed when you approached them. The general store's shadow fell across Eleanor's face as she climbed the 3 wooden steps to the porch. Through the wavering glass window, she could see shapes moving inside. Women in clean dresses, men in pressed shirts, the casual movements of people who'd eaten that morning and would eat again that night. She shifted Maya's weight and pushed the door open. The bell above jangled, cheerful and oblivious. Conversation stopped like someone had fired a gun. Eleanor had experienced this particular silence before. It started at her feet and traveled upward, taking in her dusty skirt, her too thin frame, the way she held her child like something precious that the world had already decided wasn't. By the time that silence reached her face, every person in Miller's general store had made their assessment and found her wanting. "Help you?" Jacob Miller stood behind his counter like it was a pulpit, his considerable bulk wrapped in a clean apron, his face arranged in an expression that pretended at patience. Eleanor stepped forward, Maya's head lolled against her neck, the child's breath hot and irregular against her skin. "I need food. And medicine if you have it. My daughter's been sick." "That's so." Miller didn't look at Maya, neither did anyone else. The 3 women browsing fabric bolts suddenly found the patterns fascinating. The man examining rope discovered urgent business with his pocket watch. "Yes, sir." Eleanor's voice stayed steady through sheer force of will. "I can pay. Not much, but I can pay something." "Show me." She shifted Maya to her left arm and dug into her skirt pocket with her right hand. The coins she produced, 2 quarters, 3 dimes, a handful of pennies, represented every cent she'd earned washing floors in the last town. She placed them carefully on the counter. Miller looked at the money the way he might look at something dead the cat dragged in. "That'll buy you a ½ pound of flour, maybe some beans if I'm feeling generous." "She needs broth, something with strength in it, and she's burning with fever." "Then take her to a doctor." Miller's voice carried to every corner of the store. "Assuming a doctor would see you." The words hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor felt Maya's forehead against her neck, radiating heat that had nothing to do with the weather. She'd tried 3 doctors in 3 towns. None would treat a child whose mother couldn't pay in advance. "Please." The word came out smaller than she intended. "She's just a baby. She hasn't eaten in 2 days." "Should have thought of that before you found yourself in this condition." Miller swept her coins off the counter into his palm, counted them ostentatiously, and dropped them back down with a clink. 73 cents. Take your flour and beans and be grateful, and next time try keeping your legs closed instead of spawning children you can't feed." The casual cruelty of it struck like a physical blow. Eleanor had been insulted before, called whore and worse, but never while holding her dying child. Never in front of people who nodded along like Miller was preaching gospel truth. She looked around the store. At Sarah Hendricks, who taught Sunday school. At Thomas Wade, who served on the town council. At Betty Morris, whose own children Eleanor had seen playing in the street that morning, healthy and fed and impossibly distant from the small body going limp in her arms. Not one of them met her eyes. "I'll take the flower," Eleanor heard herself say. Her voice came from somewhere far away, some mechanical part of her that still functioned while the rest collapsed inward. And the beans. Miller measured them out with exaggerated precision, making her wait while he counted every scoop. He wrapped them in brown paper and slid the package across the counter like he couldn't bear to let his fingers get too close to hers. Eleanor picked up the package. It weighed almost nothing. 2 days of food if she was careful, 3 if she let herself starve while Maya ate. She turned toward the door. "Ms. Cross," Miller's voice stopped her at the threshold. "Do us all a favor. Keep moving. We don't need your kind settling here." She didn't respond. What was there to say? She pushed through the door back into the heat, and the bell jangled again, the same cheerful sound it had made on her way in, as if nothing had changed, as if the world hadn't just confirmed that her daughter's life held no value at all. The sun hit her like a hammer. Eleanor stood on the porch, blinking against the glare, trying to remember which direction she'd come from. The street stretched empty in both directions, heat shimmer making everything waver and dance. She needed shade, water, a place to give Maya these inadequate beans before it was too late. Maya stirred against her shoulder and made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a question. "Are we still alive? Is this still happening?" "It's okay, baby," Eleanor whispered. The lie tasted like ash. "We're going to be okay." She stepped down into the street. Her boots sank slightly in the dust. 3 more steps and she'd be past the store, back in the anonymous heat, walking toward nowhere because nowhere was the only place that would have them. The horse stopped directly behind her. Eleanor didn't turn at first. Couldn't. She was too empty, too defeated, too focused on putting one foot in front of the other. But the horse stayed put, blocking her path backward, its presence unavoidable. Leather creaked. Hooves shifted in the dust. "Ma'am." The voice was low, rough-edged, like it didn't get used much. Eleanor turned. The man sat his horse like someone who'd been born in the saddle. Tall, lean, somewhere in his middle 30s with dark hair going gray at the temples. His face had the weathered look of someone who spent every day outside, deep lines around his eyes from squinting at horizons. He wore range clothes, dusty but well-made, and sat very still, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You need help," he said. Not a question. Eleanor clutched Maya tighter. "We're fine." "No, ma'am, you're not." He swung down from his horse in one fluid motion and stood there in the street, 6 feet of quiet certainty. "Your girl's sick. You just got thrown out of Miller's store with barely enough food to last a day. That's not fine by any definition I know." "I don't need charity." The words came out harder than intended, sharp with the humiliation still burning in her chest. "Didn't offer charity." He moved closer, slowly, like approaching a spooked animal. His eyes went to Maya's face and something shifted in his expression, a tightening around his mouth, a flicker of something that might have been pain. "But I need to get that child out of this heat." "You got somewhere to go?" Eleanor said nothing. The silence answered for her. The man studied her face for a long moment, then nodded like he'd made a decision. "My name's Nathan Hale. I run a ranch about 5 miles north. Got a spare room, cool water, and enough food that nobody needs to go hungry. No strings attached. Just help for someone who needs it." "Why?" The question came out suspicious, guarded. Men didn't offer help without expecting payment, and Eleanor had nothing left to pay with except the one thing she'd sworn she'd never trade again. Nathan's eyes held hers, steady and clear. "Because that little girl's about the same age my son would be, if he'd lived, and because I watched through that window what happened in there, and I'm ashamed to call Miller my neighbor." He paused. "And because my wife died 3 years ago, and before she passed, she made me promise I'd never walk past someone in need. I've broken a lot of promises in my life, but not that one." Maya stirred again, whimpering softly. Her skin against Eleanor's neck felt like it was on fire. Nathan heard it too. "She needs a doctor. There's one in Billings. That's a day's ride. Or I've got willow bark at the ranch that'll bring a fever down. Your choice, ma'am. but we need to make it now. Eleanor looked at the empty street. At Miller's store, where people were probably still watching through the window, waiting to see if the desperate woman would humiliate herself further. At the horse standing patient in the heat. At Nathan Hale, who stood like a man who'd meant every word he'd said. Maya's breathing changed, became more labored, more shallow. "All right," Eleanor whispered. "The ranch." Nathan nodded once and reached for Maya. Eleanor's arms tightened instinctively, but he waited, patient, until she slowly released her grip. He took the child with surprising gentleness, cradling her against his chest while he swung back into the saddle. Then he reached down his free hand. "Can you ride?" "Not well." "Don't need to be well, just need to hold on." He pulled her up behind him with easy strength. "Put your arms around my waist. Rest your head if you need to. It's 5 miles and I won't let you fall." Eleanor wrapped her arms around him and felt the solid reality of another human being for the first time in longer than she could remember. The horse started moving, slow and steady, carrying them out of town toward the open country. Behind them, the door to Miller's general store opened. Voices drifted out, shocked, scandalized, already spinning this into whatever story would make them feel righteous. Eleanor didn't look back. She pressed her forehead against Nathan's shoulder and held on while the town disappeared behind them in the dust. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a shimmer on the horizon, then as distinct shapes resolving into a house, barn, and outbuildings arranged around a dusty yard. Nothing fancy, but solid, built to last. The house sat in the shade of 3 massive cottonwoods that had probably been there longer than Montana had been a territory. A well stood in the yard with a bucket hanging from a rope. Chickens scratched in the dirt near the barn. It looked like a place where people lived, not just survived. Nathan rode directly to the house and dismounted, still holding Maya. "There's a room just inside on the left. Bed's made up. Get her laid down while I fetch water and the medicine." Eleanor slid from the horse and followed him into the house. The interior was dim after the brutal sunlight, blessedly cool. The room Nathan indicated held a simple bed with clean sheets, a dresser, and a window that looked out over rolling grassland. She reached for Maya, and Nathan handed her over carefully. "I'll be right back," he said, and disappeared. Eleanor laid Maya on the bed. The child's eyes fluttered open, gray like her father's had been, before he decided he wanted no part of fatherhood and disappeared into whatever hell men like him disappeared into. "Mama?" Maya's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, baby. We're somewhere safe. This nice man is going to help you feel better." "Thirsty." "I know. Water's coming." Nathan returned carrying a basin of water, clean cloths, and a small bottle of dark liquid. He set them on the dresser and poured water into a cup. "Willow bark extract," he explained, adding a few drops to the water. "Tastes bitter, but it'll bring the fever down. We'll get some proper food in her once the fever breaks." Eleanor took the cup and lifted Maya's head, helping her sip. The child grimaced at the taste, but drank. 3 swallows, 4. Then her head fell back against the pillow. "Good girl," Nathan said softly. He dipped a cloth in the cool water and handed it to Eleanor. "Keep her forehead cool. Change the cloth when it gets warm. I'll bring broth in about an hour." "Why are you doing this?" The question came out raw, unguarded. Nathan looked at Maya's small face against the white pillow, and for a moment his expression cracked open, revealing something vast and wounded underneath. "Because I couldn't save my own, but maybe I can save someone else's." He straightened, his face closing again. "Rest, ma'am. Both of you. You're safe here." He left, pulling the door partially closed behind him. Eleanor heard his boots cross the main room, heard the front door open and close. Through the window, she watched him walk to the barn, his shoulders carrying weight that had nothing to do with physical burden. She turned back to Maya and pressed the cool cloth to her daughter's forehead. The child's eyes had already closed. Her breathing seemed a little easier, or maybe that was just desperate hope making Eleanor see what she needed to see. The room was quiet except for that breathing. Dust motes drifted in the shaft of light from the window. Somewhere outside, chickens clucked. A horse whinnied in the barn. Ordinary sounds from an ordinary day in a place where ordinary life continued regardless of crisis or catastrophe. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed and watched her daughter sleep. Her hands, for the first time in days, had nothing to do. No walking to accomplish, no begging to endure, no constant vigilance against a world that wanted them erased. Just sitting, just being. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the first crack in the wall she'd built around herself, and terror rushed in through the gap. Because relief meant hope, and hope meant vulnerability. And vulnerability meant giving someone the power to hurt you when they inevitably turned cruel. The cloth grew warm under her hand. She exchanged it for a fresh one, wrung cool from the basin. Maya's forehead still radiated heat, but perhaps not quite as intensely. Perhaps. Time passed in a strange suspension. The light from the window shifted, grew slightly less harsh. Eleanor's body began to register its own needs. Thirst, hunger, exhaustion so complete it felt like gravity had tripled. She ignored all of it. Maya needed her attention more than she needed food or water. A soft knock on the doorframe made her turn. Nathan stood there holding a tray with a bowl of something steaming, a plate with bread and butter, and a pitcher of water with 2 cups. "Chicken broth," he said, entering when she didn't object. "Made it this morning before I rode to town. Figured it'd be good for when she wakes." He set the tray on the dresser. "That's for you. You need to eat. Can't take care of her if you collapse." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're maybe 90 pounds soaking wet, and you just walked 12 miles in heat that kills cattle." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "Eat. Doctor's orders." "You're not a doctor." "No, ma'am, but I've treated enough sick animals to know that caregivers need care too." He poured water into both cups and handed her one. "Drink. Eat. I'll watch her while you do." Eleanor took the cup. The water was so cold it hurt her teeth, and it was the most delicious thing she'd tasted in months. She drank until the cup was empty, then let Nathan refill it while she picked up the bread. It was fresh, soft, spread thick with real butter that melted on her tongue. She'd been rationing flour and water for so long she'd forgotten food could taste like this. Nathan sat in a chair by the window, his attention on Maya. "Fever's breaking," he observed. "Color's better, breathing's steadier." Eleanor looked at her daughter and saw he was right. The terrible flush had faded from Maya's cheeks. Her small chest rose and fell in a rhythm that looked almost normal. "Thank you," Eleanor said. The words felt massively inadequate. "Don't thank me yet. Getting the fever down is just the start. She needs rest, food, time to heal." He glanced at Eleanor. "So do you." "I can't pay you. Not in money, not in—" She left the sentence unfinished, but its meaning hung in the air. Nathan's expression hardened. "I don't want your money, and I sure as hell don't want anything else. I told you, no strings. I meant it. Men always mean it, until they don't." "Then I'm sorry for whatever men taught you that." He stood. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need. There's another bedroom upstairs that's mine. This room's yours for as long as you want it. Food in the kitchen, water from the well. Make yourself at home, or leave tomorrow if that's what you choose. Either way, nobody here is going to hurt you." He headed for the door. "Mr. Hale?" He paused, hand on the doorframe. "Why does your house feel like someone's still living in it? When you said your wife died—" Nathan's shoulders tensed. For a long moment, he didn't answer. When he did, his voice was very quiet. "Because I never took down her things. Never moved Tommy's toys. Never changed anything except that I live here alone now." He looked back at her, and his eyes held an emptiness that made Eleanor's breath catch. "This house is a memorial to people who aren't coming back. You and your daughter are the first living souls besides me to sleep under this roof in 3 years." He left before she could respond. Eleanor sat in the dimming light, holding her bread, listening to Maya breathe. She thought about memorials and the ways people carried their dead. Thought about Nathan Hale, who'd kept his wife's promise even when keeping it meant letting strangers into his carefully preserved grief. She thought about the town that had turned its back, about Miller's cruel words, about the long walk through heat that had nearly killed them both. And she thought about the fact that she'd told Nathan they'd leave tomorrow, but he'd said they could stay as long as they needed. As if there was a difference between those two things. As if need was something that mattered here. Maya stirred and opened her eyes. They focused on Eleanor's face, and for the first time in days, Eleanor saw actual awareness in them. "Mama, where are we?" "Somewhere safe, baby. somewhere we can rest. I'm hungry, Eleanor laughed, a sound she didn't recognize coming from her own throat. Then let's get you fed. She helped Maya sit up and spooned broth carefully into her daughter's mouth. The child ate slowly, 4 spoonfuls, then 5, before exhaustion claimed her again. But it was clean exhaustion now, not the terrible lassitude of fever. Healing exhaustion. Eleanor laid her daughter back down and pulled the sheet up to her chin. Maya's eyes were already closing. Love you, Mama. Love you too, baby. So much. She watched Maya drift back to sleep, then finished her own bread and drank another cup of water. Through the window, the sun was setting, painting the grassland in shades of amber and rust. Beautiful country, if you could afford to notice beauty, if survival wasn't consuming every moment of every day. Eleanor stood and walked to the window. In the distance, she could see Nathan working near the barn, mending fence, she thought, though the light was getting too dim to be sure. He moved with the easy economy of someone who'd done the same tasks 1,000 times, who knew his own land and routine so well he could work half blind. A man who'd built this place with someone he loved, who'd lost everything and kept going anyway, who'd seen a stranger in town and offered shelter without hesitation. Eleanor didn't know what to do with kindness when it appeared, didn't know how to accept it without waiting for the blade hidden underneath. But Maya was breathing steadily in the bed behind her, full of warm broth and willow bark medicine, sleeping in clean sheets in a safe room. And for tonight, at least, that was enough. She closed the curtains and settled into the chair Nathan had used, pulling it close to the bed. Her body ached with the particular exhaustion that follows sustained crisis. She should sleep. Would sleep, eventually. But for now, she just sat in the darkness, listening to her daughter breathe, feeling the night settle over the ranch like a blanket. Safe. For the first time in longer than she could remember. Tomorrow would bring its own questions. About staying or leaving, about trust, and the cost of accepting help. Tomorrow she'd have to decide whether to believe in Nathan Hale's promise or protect herself against inevitable disappointment. But tonight, in this quiet room in this stranger's house, Eleanor Cross let herself rest. And in the barn, Nathan Hale finished mending his fence and stood looking at the house where lights glowed in windows that had been dark for 3 years. He thought about his wife Sarah, who'd believed people were fundamentally good, about his son Tommy, who'd never learned to be afraid of strangers, about the promises he'd made to them both before the fever took them, about the woman and child sleeping in the room where Sarah used to sew, about the way Maya's face had looked so much like Tommy's when he'd carried her inside. About the old grief that never quite healed but sometimes, maybe, could be redirected toward something resembling purpose. He walked to the house, climbed the stairs to his empty bedroom, and lay down in the darkness. And for the first time in 3 years, the house didn't feel quite so much like a tomb. Outside, the Montana night spread vast and star-filled over the grassland. Inside, 3 damaged people slept under the same roof, breathing the same air, beginning something that none of them had words for yet. But beginning, nonetheless. Morning came softly to the ranch, light spreading across the grassland in gradual degrees, turning the darkness pale gray, then gold, then white-hot as the sun cleared the horizon. Eleanor woke in the chair beside Maya's bed, her neck stiff from sleeping upright, her body aching in places she'd forgotten could hurt. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came back in a rush. The town. Miller's store. Nathan Hale on his horse. Maya was awake, sitting up in bed, looking around the room with the wide-eyed curiosity of a child who'd been too sick to notice her surroundings the night before. "Mama, whose house is this?" "A man named Nathan. He's helping us." Eleanor stood, wincing as her muscles protested. "How do you feel, baby?" "Better. My head doesn't hurt anymore." Maya touched her own forehead experimentally. "Can we stay here?" The question carried more weight than a 5-year-old should have to bear. Eleanor had moved them through 7 towns in 4 months, always one step ahead of debt or judgment or men who thought a woman alone was an invitation. Maya had learned not to unpack, not to make friends, not to ask if they could stay. "I don't know yet," Eleanor said honestly, "but for today, yes, we can stay for today." A knock on the doorframe interrupted them. Nathan stood there holding a tray, his hair damp like he'd already been to the well, his shirt clean. "Morning. Thought you might be hungry." He set the tray on the dresser. Eggs, bacon, toast with jam, more of that cold well water. Real food. Enough of it. Maya's eyes went wide. "Is that all for us?" "Unless you're planning to share with the chickens." Nathan's voice was gruff, but something in his expression softened when he looked at the child. "You're looking better, little miss. Fever's gone?" Maya nodded, suddenly shy. "Good. You gave us a scare yesterday." He turned to Eleanor. "There's a bathing room out back, heated water on the stove if you want it, and Sarah's clothes are still in the dresser upstairs. You're about her size. Help yourself to anything that fits." Eleanor stiffened. "I can't wear a dead woman's clothes. They're just sitting there getting moth-eaten. Sarah would have wanted them used." Nathan moved toward the door. "I've got work to do. You need anything, holler. I'll be within earshot." He left before Eleanor could argue further. She looked at the food, at Maya's hungry face, and made the only decision possible. "Eat, baby, slowly." They ate together on the bed, Maya devouring her portion with the desperate enthusiasm of someone who'd gone too long without, Eleanor forcing herself to take small bites, to let her stomach adjust. The eggs were perfectly cooked, the bacon crisp, the toast warm and sweet with jam that tasted like it had been made from real berries, not the cheap preserves you could buy in stores. When they'd finished, Eleanor helped Maya wash her face and hands in the basin, then ventured out into the main room. The house was bigger than it had seemed the night before, a large common area with a fireplace, a kitchen that opened off to one side, stairs leading up to what must be Nathan's room. Everything was clean but spare, functional. A house that had lost its softness when it lost its women. The bathing room was attached to the back of the house, a luxury Eleanor hadn't expected. She heated water on the stove, filled the tub, and helped Maya wash properly for the first time in weeks. The child's ribs showed through her skin, each bone visible. Her arms were too thin, but her eyes were clear, her fever gone, her spirit returning. "Can I play outside, Mama?" Eleanor's instinct was to say no, to keep Maya close, to maintain constant vigilance. But they were 5 miles from town, and Nathan Hale didn't feel dangerous, didn't feel like the kind of man who'd hurt a child. "Stay where I can see you," she said finally. "Don't wander off." Maya scrambled out of the tub and into her clean dress. Eleanor had washed it the night before while her daughter slept, and ran outside with the boundless energy of a child who'd been sick too long. Eleanor watched through the window as Maya discovered the chickens, laughing when they scattered at her approach. The sound of that laughter did something to Eleanor's chest, tightened it and released it simultaneously. She bathed quickly, then climbed the stairs to Nathan's room. It was even more spare than the rest of the house. A bed, a dresser, a chair by the window. Nothing on the walls. Nothing personal except a photograph on the dresser showing Nathan with a woman and a small boy. The woman was pretty in a straightforward way, smiling at the camera like she had every reason to be happy. The boy looked like Nathan, same dark hair, same serious eyes, both of them frozen in a moment before everything ended. Eleanor turned away from the photograph and opened the dresser. Sarah's clothes were neatly folded, organized by type. Dresses, skirts, blouses, undergarments, all of it clean and waiting, like Sarah might return at any moment and need something to wear. Eleanor selected a simple cotton dress in faded blue, practical boots that were only slightly too large, and undergarments that fit well enough. She dressed quickly, feeling like an intruder, then folded her own ragged clothes and left them on the chair. When she looked in the small mirror above the dresser, she barely recognized herself. Clean, properly dressed, almost respectable. She went back downstairs and outside, following the sound of hammering to the barn. Nathan was working on a stall door, his movements precise and economical. He looked up when her shadow fell across the doorway. "Dress fits," he observed. "Yes, thank you." Eleanor hesitated. "Mr. Hale, we can't stay here indefinitely. I need to find work, somewhere Maya and I can settle." Nathan drove another nail home before answering. "What kind of work you looking for?" "Anything, washing, cooking, mending. I'm strong. I can learn." "Town's not going to hire you. You saw how they are." He selected another nail from the box at his feet. "But I could use help around here. Place is too big for one person. House needs a woman's touch, meals need cooking, garden's gone to hell. Room and board plus $20 a month. You interested? Eleanor stared at him. That's more than fair wages for housework. It's what Sarah used to make when she sold eggs and vegetables in town. Before. Nathan's jaw tightened. Money's just sitting in the bank doing nothing. Might as well do some good. Why? The question came out harder than she intended. Why help us? You don't know anything about me. I could be a thief, could rob you blind and disappear. Nathan set down his hammer and looked at her directly. Could be, but I don't think you are. I think you're a woman who's been knocked around by life and is trying to protect her child. And I think this ranch is big enough for 3 people, if those 3 people can learn to live together without stepping on each other's pain. The honesty of it disarmed her completely. Eleanor had expected platitudes or evasion, not this blunt acknowledgement of damage. I can't promise we won't bring trouble, she said. Maya's father, is he looking for you? No, he made it clear he wanted nothing to do with us. The old shame flickered, familiar and bitter. But people talk, and a woman with a child and no husband, that invites a certain kind of attention. Let them talk. We're 5 miles from town. They can gossip all they want as long as they stay off my land. Nathan picked up his hammer again. You want the job or not? Eleanor thought about alternatives. Going back to town, finding another town, walking until her boots fell apart and Maya got sick again. The endless cycle of begging and rejection and desperate scrambling for survival. Yes, she said, I want the job. Good. Start today. Kitchen needs cleaning, and I haven't had a decent meal in 3 years. He drove another nail home with 3 solid strikes. And Eleanor? It was the first time he'd used her given name. She waited. Welcome to the ranch. The work was hard but honest. Eleanor scrubbed the kitchen until her hands were raw, discovering corners and surfaces that hadn't been properly cleaned in years. She found Sarah's recipe book in a drawer, pages stained and worn, notes written in feminine script, and used it to make bread that actually rose. Soup that tasted like something besides boiled water and wishful thinking. Maya played in the yard, helping feed chickens, collecting eggs with the grave seriousness of a child given important responsibility. Nathan worked outside, fixing fences and tending livestock, but Eleanor caught him watching sometimes. Not in a threatening way, but like he was trying to reconcile the presence of living people with his carefully maintained memorial. 3 days passed like this. Then a week. Eleanor fell into rhythms she'd almost forgotten, waking before dawn, starting coffee, preparing breakfast while Nathan did the first round of chores. He'd come in smelling like hay and horses, eat without much conversation, then head back out. Lunch was simple, often eaten outside. Dinner was when they sat together at the table, the 3 of them, navigating the strange geometry of becoming something like a household. Maya began to bloom. Color returned to her cheeks. She gained weight. She started talking more, asking Nathan endless questions about the ranch, the animals, the land itself. He answered with the patience of a man who'd once had a son who asked the same kinds of questions. But he never touched her, never got too close. Like there was an invisible line he refused to cross. Eleanor noticed other things too, the way Nathan's hand shook sometimes when he reached for his coffee, the way he'd stand at Tommy's bedroom door late at night, just standing there, not going in. The way he flinched when Maya laughed a certain way or turned her head at a certain angle, or said something in a tone that must have echoed his lost son. She was living in a house with a man who'd carved out his grief and learned to function inside the hollow space it left. And she was starting to understand that Nathan's generosity wasn't kindness exactly. It was penance. An attempt to balance books that would never balance. One evening, after Maya had gone to bed, Eleanor found Nathan on the porch watching the sun set over the grassland. She brought him coffee and sat in the chair beside him. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Might not answer. "What happened to them? Your wife and son?" Nathan was silent for so long Eleanor thought he wouldn't respond. Then he said, "Fever. Same kind your Maya had. Came on fast. Sarah got sick first, then Tommy. I rode for the doctor, but by the time we got back..." He stopped, started again. "Tommy died first." He was only 4. Sarah held on another day, kept asking if Tommy was all right, and I kept lying and saying yes because I couldn't tell her. Couldn't break her heart before it stopped beating. Eleanor felt tears on her face before she realized she was crying. When it was over, I should have left, sold this place, started fresh somewhere the ghost couldn't follow. Nathan's voice was flat, emptied of emotion by repetition. But I couldn't, because if I left, it would mean they were really gone. So I stayed, kept everything the same, told myself I was honoring their memory. You were grieving. I was hiding. Nathan looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the last light. And then you showed up with Maya, and I saw Tommy in her face, and I thought maybe I could do something right for once. Save someone. Matter in some small way. You do matter, Eleanor said. You saved my daughter's life. Maybe, or maybe I just postponed the inevitable. World's hard on people like you, Eleanor. Single mothers, poor women. Sooner or later it grinds you down. Then I'll fight back. The words surprised her with their vehemence. I've been ground down before. I'm still here. So is Maya. We're survivors, Mr. Hale. Don't underestimate us. Something shifted in Nathan's expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. Fair enough. But out here, you don't have to just survive. You could live, if you wanted to. The statement hung between them, weighted with implications Eleanor wasn't ready to examine. She stood, taking Nathan's empty cup. Thank you for telling me. About Sarah and Tommy. Thank you for asking. Nathan remained on the porch as Eleanor went inside. And Eleanor? Call me Nathan. Mr. Hale makes me feel like I'm 100 years old. She smiled despite herself. All right, Nathan. Inside, she checked on Maya, sleeping peacefully, her small body curled around a rag doll Eleanor had found in Tommy's old room. Nathan had given permission for Maya to have it, his voice careful and controlled when he'd said, Tommy would have wanted someone to play with his toys. Eleanor touched her daughter's hair gently, then went to her own room. She sat on the bed and let herself think about what Nathan had said, about living instead of just surviving, about the difference between those two states of being. She'd been surviving for so long she'd forgotten what living felt like, forgotten that it was even possible for people like her. But here on this ranch, in this house built on grief and maintained by stubbornness, something was shifting. Maya was healing. Eleanor was working honest work for honest pay. And Nathan, damaged, haunted Nathan, was showing them both that kindness could exist without transaction. It was terrifying, because if she let herself believe in it, let herself hope, the inevitable collapse would destroy her completely. But Maya's laughter echoed in her memory, and the feel of clean clothes, and bread that rose, and mornings without fear. Maybe, Eleanor thought, maybe it was worth the risk. She lay down in the darkness and let exhaustion take her, and for the second week in a row, she slept without nightmares. The following Saturday, Nathan rode into town for supplies. He asked if Eleanor wanted anything, and she gave him a list: thread, fabric, small things she could buy with her first week's wages. He took the money, but his expression suggested he didn't plan to accept it. Be back before dark, he said, swinging into the saddle. You need anything before then? Eleanor shook her head. We'll be fine. He rode off, leaving Eleanor and Maya alone on the ranch for the first time. It should have felt vulnerable, 2 women isolated, unprotected. Instead, it felt like freedom. Eleanor worked in the garden Sarah had once maintained, pulling weeds and clearing space for new growth. Maya helped, chattering about the chickens and asking if they could get a kitten someday. They were so absorbed in the work that neither of them heard the horses until they were already in the yard. Eleanor looked up to see 3 men on horseback, their presence incongruous against the peaceful afternoon. The one in front was older, maybe 50, with silver hair and expensive clothes that didn't belong on a working ranch. The 2 behind him were younger, harder, wearing guns in a way that suggested they knew how to use them. The silver-haired man dismounted smoothly and smiled at Eleanor. It was a practiced smile, full of teeth, empty of warmth. Afternoon, ma'am. Name's Silas Brewer. I'm looking for Nathan Hale. Eleanor stood, brushing dirt from her hands. Maya pressed against her side, suddenly quiet. He's not here. Went to town. That's so. Brewer looked around the ranch with proprietorial interest. Beautiful place he's got here. Must be lonely, though, living out here all by himself. His eyes returned to Eleanor, assessing. But seems he's found some company. I work here, that's all. Brewer's smile widened. And what kind of work would that be, exactly? The insinuation was obvious. Eleanor felt her face heat. Housekeeping, cooking, honest work. Sure it is. No judgment here, ma'am. Brewer took a step closer. Thing is, I've got business with Mr. Hale. Been trying to buy this ranch for near about 2 years now. He keeps refusing, but I'm a patient man. Eventually everyone realizes that cash in hand beats stubborn pride. I'll tell him you came by. You do that. Brewer tipped his hat. And tell him Silas Brewer doesn't like being refused, especially not by men who think they're better than everyone else just because they're drowning in grief. He remounted his horse. The 2 men behind him hadn't said a word, hadn't moved, but their presence carried a threat that needed no articulation. Eleanor watched them ride away, her heart hammering. Maya was trembling against her side. Mama, I didn't like those men. Neither did I, baby. Eleanor pulled Maya close. Let's go inside. They waited inside until Nathan returned at dusk, his horse laden with supplies. Eleanor helped him unload, then told him about Brewer's visit. Nathan's expression went very still. What did he say exactly? Eleanor repeated the conversation. Nathan's jaw clenched tighter with each word. He's a vulture, Nathan said finally. Buys up land from people who can't afford to keep it, then runs them off or works them to death. He's been after this place since Sarah died, figures I'm weak enough now to sell. Are you? The question was out before Eleanor could stop it. Thinking about selling? Nathan looked at her, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. I was. Before. Didn't seem to matter much whether I kept it or not. But now, he glanced toward the house where Maya's silhouette was visible in the window. Now I've got reasons to stay. The weight of that statement settled over Eleanor like a blanket, warm and suffocating simultaneously. He'll come back, she said. Men like that don't give up. I know. Nathan finished unloading the last of the supplies. But this is my land, and I'll be damned if I let Silas Brewer take it from me. The threat didn't materialize immediately, which made it worse. 3 weeks passed with nothing more than the ordinary rhythms of ranch life. Work from dawn until dusk, meals shared at the kitchen table, evenings on the porch watching the sun paint the grassland in colors that had no names. But the waiting wore on all of them. Nathan checked the horizon more frequently. Eleanor found herself listening for hoofbeats that never came. Even Maya seemed to sense the tension, staying closer to the house, asking fewer questions. Then on a Tuesday morning in late August, when the heat had built to a suffocating pressure that made the air itself feel dangerous, Silas Brewer returned. Eleanor was hanging laundry when she heard the horses. Not 3 this time, 7, maybe 8. She dropped the wet sheet back in the basket and ran toward the house, calling for Maya. The child appeared from the barn, and Eleanor grabbed her hand, pulling her inside. Stay away from the windows, Eleanor said. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Mama, I'm scared. I know, baby. Just stay hidden, please. Eleanor stepped onto the porch as the riders entered the yard. Brewer sat his horse in the center, flanked by 6 men who looked like they'd been hired for their capacity for violence rather than any particular skill. Nathan was working the far fence line. She could see him in the distance, already moving toward the house at a run. Ms. Cross, Brewer said, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. Lovely morning, isn't it? Eleanor said nothing. Her hands gripped the porch railing so hard her knuckles went white. Where's your employer? I have business to discuss. You're trespassing. Leave. Brewer laughed, a sound like gravel sliding down a metal chute. Trespassing? On land that should have been mine months ago? That's rich. He swung down from his horse, his boots hitting the dirt with deliberate weight. See, I've been doing some asking around about you, Eleanor Cross. Interesting story. Husband ran off, if there ever was a husband. Baby born anyway. 7 towns in 4 months, each one kicking you out faster than the last. And now here you are, playing house with a grief-stricken widower who's too stupid to see what you really are. Get off this property. Eleanor's voice shook but held steady. Nathan will what? Brewer was at the porch steps now, climbing them slowly. Protect you? Fight for your honor? He laughed again. Men like Nathan Hale, they don't fight. They just hurt quietly and wait to die. Nathan's voice cut across the yard like a gunshot. Step away from her, Brewer. He stood 30 feet away, breathing hard from his run, his rifle held loose in his hands. Not aimed yet, but the threat was implicit. Brewer turned, his smile widening. There he is, the grieving widower himself. I was just getting acquainted with your house guest, charming woman. I can see why you took her in. Last chance, get off my land. Or what? You'll shoot me? Brewer spread his arms wide. Go ahead, murder me in front of 7 witnesses. See how that works out for you in a court of law. Because I'm a respectable businessman and you're a broken-down rancher with a whore and her bastard living under your roof. Nathan raised the rifle. The movement was fluid, practiced, and suddenly the barrel was aimed directly at Brewer's chest. Don't call her that again. Touched a nerve, did I? Brewer's smile never wavered, but something predatory entered his eyes. Here's the situation, Hale. You owe money, lots of it. Doctor bills from when your family died, supplies on credit, interest that's been compounding for 3 years while you wallowed in self-pity. I bought up every debt you had, and now they're all coming due. I paid the doctor, Nathan said. Paid every bill I owed. You paid what you could, but debt's a funny thing, keeps growing even when you think it's settled. And the bank's very interested in foreclosing on a property this valuable. Brewer pulled papers from his coat pocket. I've got legal claim to this ranch unless you can pay $3,500 by the end of the month. You got $3,500, Hale? Nathan's finger moved to the trigger. Eleanor could see it from the porch, could see the exact moment when his grief and rage condensed into a single point of lethal intention. She knew what was about to happen, had seen it in the eyes of desperate men before. Nathan was going to kill Brewer, consequences be damned, and then Brewer's men would kill Nathan, and Eleanor and Maya would be left alone again with nothing but bodies and blood. She did the only thing she could think of. She stepped between Nathan and Brewer. Nathan, don't. Get out of the way, Eleanor. No. She moved closer to him, her body blocking his line of fire. He wants you to shoot him. That's the whole point. You kill him, you lose everything. The ranch, your freedom, your life. And Maya and I... Her voice cracked. We'll have nowhere to go. Nathan's eyes met hers over the rifle barrel, and Eleanor saw the abyss looking back. 3 years of pain seeking an outlet, a reason to end, permission to stop carrying weight that had long since become unbearable. He called you a whore, Nathan said quietly. Nobody calls you that and walks away. I've been called worse, by better men. Eleanor reached out slowly and put her hand on the rifle barrel, pushing it down. This isn't how you protect us. This is how you destroy everything you've built. I haven't built anything. I've just been dying slowly. Then stop dying. The words came out fierce, desperate. Stop using grief as an excuse to give up. Sarah and Tommy are gone, Nathan. They're gone, and they're not coming back. And killing Silas Brewer won't change that. But Maya is here. I'm here. We're alive, and we need you alive too. Something broke in Nathan's expression, a crack that went all the way down to whatever foundation he'd been standing on. The rifle lowered, his hands started shaking. Brewer clapped slowly, the sound obscene in the charged silence. Well, that was touching. Almost made me forget I came here on business. He refolded his papers and tucked them away. End of the month, Hale. $3,500 or the ranch is mine. And your little whore and her brat can go back to whatever gutter they crawled out of. He walked back to his horse, mounted, and gestured to his men. They rode out slowly, taking their time, making sure the humiliation lasted as long as possible. Eleanor watched until they disappeared, then turned back to Nathan. He was still standing with the rifle hanging loose, staring at nothing. She took the weapon from his hands and set it against the porch railing. Nathan. He didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there looking at the place where Brewer had been, his breathing shallow and rapid. Eleanor touched his arm gently. Come inside. Please. He let her guide him into the house, into a chair at the kitchen table. She poured water with shaking hands and set it in front of him. He didn't drink, just sat there staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Maya emerged from the bedroom, her face tear-streaked. Is he gone? The bad man? He's gone, baby. Eleanor pulled Maya onto her lap. Everything's all right. But it wasn't all right. Eleanor could see the calculation happening behind Nathan's eyes, could see him adding up debts and options and finding only one solution that made sense. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. I don't have $3,500. Even if I sold every head of cattle, every piece of equipment, I might get half that. Maybe. There has to be another way. There isn't. Nathan looked at her then, and his eyes held nothing but defeat. He wins. That's how this ends. Men like Brewer always win. No. Eleanor stood, settling Maya in the chair. No, I don't accept that. We'll figure something out. We? Nathan's laugh was bitter. This isn't your problem, Eleanor. You've got no stake in this ranch, no reason to care what happens to it. Except that it's my home now, and you're... She stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. What was Nathan to her? Employer? Protector? Something more complicated that she didn't have words for yet? You took us in when we had nothing. I'm not going to stand by and watch you lose everything. Noble sentiment, but sentiment doesn't pay debts. Nathan stood, moving toward the door. I need to think. I just need to be alone for a while. He walked out into the burning afternoon, his shoulders bowed under invisible weight. Eleanor watched him go, feeling helpless and furious in equal measure. Maya tugged on her skirt. Mama, what's going to happen to us? I don't know, baby. Eleanor pulled her daughter close. But we're not giving up, not yet. She spent the rest of the day trying to work, trying to maintain normalcy for Maya's sake, but her mind was racing through possibilities. She had $17 saved from her wages, a fortune by her standards, meaningless against Brewer's demands. Nathan had the ranch, the cattle, the equipment, but even all of that together wouldn't be enough. There had to be something she was missing, some angle Brewer hadn't considered. Nathan didn't come in for dinner. Eleanor fed Maya and put her to bed early, then stood at the window watching the sun set over the grassland. Somewhere out there, Nathan was carrying his grief and his failure, probably contemplating whether it was worth continuing at all. She found him finally near midnight, sitting on the ground near the graves. Eleanor hadn't known they were there. 2 wooden crosses under a cottonwood tree at the edge of the property, weathered but carefully maintained. Sarah Hale. Thomas Hale. The markers were simple, stark, permanent. Nathan looked up when Eleanor approached. His face was wet with tears he hadn't bothered to hide. I told her I'd take care of this place, he said. Promised Sarah before she died that I wouldn't let it go, that I'd keep it for Tommy even though Tommy was already gone. His voice broke. And now I can't even do that right. Can't keep one simple promise to a dead woman. Eleanor sat down beside him, not touching, just present. You've kept it for 3 years against everything that's tried to break you. That counts for something. Not enough. Nathan wiped his face roughly. Brewer's right about one thing. I've been dying slowly, just going through motions, waiting for it to be over. And now it is. It's not over until you decide it is. Eleanor looked at the graves, at the names carved into weathered wood. Did Sarah give up when the fever came? No, she fought like hell. Both of them did. Then honor that. Fight like hell now. Don't give Brewer this ranch without making him bleed for it. Nathan turned to look at her, something like hope flickering in his expression. How? What can I possibly do against a man with lawyers and money and the whole town in his pocket? I don't know yet. But we have 3 weeks. That's 3 weeks to find a solution. 3 weeks to fight back. Eleanor stood and held out her hand. Come inside. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start figuring this out. Nathan took her hand and let her pull him to his feet. They walked back to the house in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Not the silence of defeat, but of possibility. Of 2 people who'd been broken in different ways, recognizing that together they might be strong enough to resist. The next morning, Eleanor woke with an idea that was probably desperate and definitely dangerous, but it was the only thing she could think of. She waited until after breakfast, until Maya was occupied with the chickens, then approached Nathan in the barn. "I need to go to town," she said. "Today." Nathan looked up from the harness he was mending, surprised. "Why? You hate that town. They hate you." "Because Brewer's debts come from somewhere. Bills, ledgers, paperwork. If he's lying about what you owe, there'll be proof. And if he's telling the truth, there might be a way to negotiate." Eleanor crossed her arms. "Either way, sitting here waiting for the end doesn't help. The bank won't talk to you. Neither will any of the merchants." "Then I'll make them talk. I didn't survive this long by being polite." Eleanor met his eyes. "I can do this, Nathan. Let me help." Nathan studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but I'm coming with you." "No, you go into town, you'll end up in a fight. Or worse." Eleanor shook her head. "Trust me to handle this, please." It took him 3 more seconds to decide. "Take the wagon. And Eleanor, be careful. Brewer's got eyes everywhere." She took the wagon and drove into town alone. The same street she'd walked in desperation just weeks ago, looking different in morning light. Still hostile, still unwelcoming, but Eleanor was different now. Fed, dressed decently, armed with purpose instead of just survival. The bank was her first stop. She tied up the wagon and walked in like she owned the place, her heart hammering but her face calm. The clerk behind the counter looked up and his expression curdled. "We don't serve your kind here. I'm not here to open an account. I'm here about Nathan Hale's debts." Eleanor planted her hands on the counter. "Silas Brewer claims he owes $3,500. I want to see the documentation." "That's confidential bank business." "Then get someone who can tell me what I need to know. Because if those debts are fabricated, that's fraud. And I may be just a poor woman with a bastard child, but I know the law well enough to make noise about fraud." The clerk's face went red. "Wait here." He disappeared into a back office. Eleanor waited, counting her heartbeats, watching other customers watch her with undisguised contempt. Let them look. She'd been looked at worse. The man who emerged was older, better dressed, carrying himself with the authority of someone who made decisions. "I'm Mr. Hendricks, the bank manager. My clerk says you're asking about the Hale account." "That's right. I want to see what he owes and to whom." Hendricks studied her with cool appraisal. "You his wife?" "I work for him, and I have authority to examine his accounts." A complete lie, but delivered with enough confidence that Hendricks hesitated. Even if that were true, bank records aren't public information. "But court records are, and if I have to file a complaint about fraudulent debt collection to see those records, I will." Eleanor leaned forward. "Save us both the trouble, Mr. Hendricks. Show me what Nathan Hale actually owes, or explain to a judge why you refused." Hendricks' expression suggested he was recalculating his assumptions about the desperate woman who'd begged for mercy in Miller's store. "Wait here." He returned 10 minutes later with a ledger. "Nathan Hale's account. You can look, but you can't copy." Eleanor opened the ledger and started reading. The entries were detailed. Doctor visits, medicine, supplies purchased on credit during Sarah's illness. All legitimate. All documented. And the total came to $1,800. Not $3,500. "This says $1,800, Eleanor said. "Brewer claims $35. Brewer bought the debts at a premium, then added his own fees and interest, perfectly legal." Hendricks took the ledger back. "Nathan signed papers when he bought on credit. Those papers had interest clauses, compounding monthly. Over 3 years, $1,800 becomes considerably more." "Can you show me those papers?" "No, Brewer has them now. They're his property." Hendricks closed the ledger with finality. "If Nathan wants to dispute the amount, he can hire a lawyer. Of course, lawyers cost money too." Eleanor felt the trap closing. Brewer had been smart, used legitimate debt as foundation, then built his extortion on top of legal paperwork that would take months and thousands of dollars to challenge. By the time any court sorted it out, the ranch would be long gone. "There has to be a way to negotiate," Eleanor said. "Some kind of payment plan." "Take it up with Brewer. He owns the debt now." Hendricks gestured toward the door. "We're done here." Eleanor left the bank feeling like she'd been punched. She tried the general store next, then the feed supplier, then every merchant Nathan had done business with. The story was the same everywhere. Brewer had bought the debts, added his fees, made everything legal just enough that fighting it would cost more than surrendering. By noon, Eleanor was exhausted and no closer to a solution. She sat in the wagon trying to think, trying to find some angle she'd missed. Around her, the town went about its business, people shopping, talking, living their ordinary lives while Eleanor's world collapsed in slow motion. Ms. Cross? Eleanor looked up to find a woman standing beside the wagon, young, maybe 20, with a baby on her hip and bruises poorly concealed with powder. She looked familiar, but Eleanor couldn't place her. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said quietly, "but I wanted to say thank you." "For what?" "For standing up to Mr. Miller in his store that day." The woman shifted the baby to her other hip. "I was there, saw the whole thing, and after you left, I told my husband what Miller said to you, about how wrong it was. And my husband, he's on the town council. He's been trying to get people to see that we can't keep treating folks like that, like they're less than human just because they're struggling." Eleanor stared at her. "I don't understand." "There's some of us who think Silas Brewer's been poisoning this town for too long, buying up land, running people off, acting like he owns everything, including our conscience." The woman glanced around nervously. "We can't help much, but there's a lawyer in Billings, Mr. Carson. He's taken on Brewer before. Might be willing to help Mr. Hale. Tell him Rebecca Watts sent you." She walked away quickly, disappearing into the crowd before Eleanor could respond. Eleanor sat stunned, trying to process this small, unexpected kindness in a place she'd written off as irredeemable. A lawyer. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had 10 minutes ago. She drove to Billings that afternoon, arriving as evening shadows stretched across the street. Carson's office was above a hardware store, modest but clean. The man who answered her knock was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with ink-stained fingers and intelligent eyes. "Mr. Carson, my name is Eleanor Cross. Rebecca Watts sent me. I need help with a legal matter." Carson listened while Eleanor explained the situation, Brewer's demands, the debt calculations, the 3-week deadline. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Brewer's been playing this game for years," he said. "Buys legitimate debt, inflates it with fees and interest that technically comply with the law, then forces people to sell or forfeit. I fought him twice, lost both times." "Then you know how he operates, how to stop him." "Knowing and stopping are different things, Ms. Cross. Brewer's got resources I don't, and judges who owe him favors." Carson stood and walked to his window, looking out over the street. "But there might be a way. If Nathan can prove he's been paying down the debt in good faith, we can argue for a restructuring. It won't eliminate what he owes, but it might buy time." "How much time?" 6 months. Maybe a year if we're lucky." Carson turned back to her. "But my fee is $200. "You got $200? Eleanor thought of her $17. "No." "Then I can't help you. I'm sorry." Carson's expression was genuinely apologetic. "I wish I could work for free, but I've got my own bills to pay." Eleanor stood. "Thank you for your time." She walked down the stairs and back to the wagon, feeling like she'd been gutted. So close to help, only to have it snatched away by the same poverty that had always defined her life. She climbed into the wagon and just sat there, too exhausted to cry, too defeated to move. Then she remembered Nathan's face when he'd looked at Sarah's grave, remembered his promise to keep the ranch, remembered Maya's question, "What's going to happen to us?" Eleanor drove back to the ranch as stars emerged overhead, arriving well past midnight. Nathan was waiting on the porch, his face tight with worry that relaxed slightly when he saw her. "You were gone so long, I thought—" He stopped. "What happened?" Eleanor climbed down from the wagon and told him everything: the bank, the inflated debt, the lawyer who might help for $200 they didn't have. Nathan listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When she finished, he said quietly, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I brought you into this mess. Sorry you wasted a whole day trying to save something that can't be saved." "It's not wasted if we keep fighting." Eleanor touched his arm. "We have 3 weeks. Anything can happen in 3 weeks." Nathan looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. "Why are you doing this? Why do you care what happens to this ranch?" "Because it's home," Eleanor said simply. "For the first time in my life, I have a home, and I'm not giving it up without a fight." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding deeper than words, a recognition that what they'd built here mattered more than either of them had admitted. Nathan covered her hand with his own, and they stood there in the starlight, two broken people holding on to each other because letting go meant falling into darkness neither of them would survive. "We'll find a way," Nathan said. "Somehow. We'll find a way." But even as he said it, Eleanor could hear the doubt underneath, could feel time running out like water through their fingers. 3 weeks until the end. 3 weeks to find $200. 3 weeks to save everything that mattered. It wasn't enough time, but it was all they had. They stood there until the cold drove them inside, neither willing to speak first, both aware that words would only confirm what they already knew. Time was running out, and hope was running thinner. Eleanor made coffee from habit more than need, her hands moving through familiar motions while her mind raced through calculations that never added up right. Nathan sat at the table watching her, and when she set the cup in front of him, he caught her wrist gently. "You should take Maya and leave," he said. "Before this gets ugly. Brewer won't stop at taking the ranch. Men like him, they need to destroy everything completely. Grind it into dust so nobody else gets ideas about resisting." Eleanor pulled her hand back. "I'm not leaving." "Eleanor, I said, I'm not leaving." She sat down across from him. "You want to give up? Fine. That's your choice. But don't make it mine. Don't tell me to run when I finally found somewhere worth staying." Nathan's eyes searched her face. "This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment you offered us shelter. The moment you fed Maya when she was dying. The moment you gave me work and dignity and a reason to believe people could be decent." Eleanor's voice cracked. "You don't get to save someone's life and then tell them to walk away when you need saving in return." "I don't know how to be saved." The admission came out raw, painful. "Don't even know if I want to be. Most days I'm still just waiting for it to be over, for the guilt to stop, for the memories to fade enough that I can sleep without seeing Tommy's face." "Then stop waiting." Eleanor reached across the table and took his hand, gripping it hard enough to hurt. "Start living. Start fighting. Start believing that Sarah and Tommy would want you to survive this instead of drowning in it." Nathan's composure finally shattered. He put his head in his hands and wept, deep, wrenching sobs that sounded like they'd been buried for 3 years. Eleanor moved around the table and put her arms around him, holding him while he broke apart, offering the only comfort she knew how to give. Just presence. Just witness. Just proof that he wasn't alone in his grief anymore. When the storm passed, Nathan straightened, wiping his face roughly. "I'm sorry, you didn't sign up for this." "Nobody signs up for the hard parts, they just come." Eleanor returned to her chair. "But we're still here, still alive, still capable of fighting back." "With what? We don't have $200, don't have time to earn it, don't have anything Brewer wants except this land." Eleanor stared at her coffee, watching steam rise and dissipate. An idea was forming. Desperate, probably stupid, but her whole life had been built on desperate and stupid choices that had kept her and Maya alive this long. "What if we don't need $200? She said slowly. "What if we just need to make Brewer think twice about taking the ranch?" "He's not going to think twice. He's been planning this for years." "Maybe, but men like Brewer, they're bullies, and bullies back down when their targets fight back hard enough to make victory expensive." Eleanor looked at Nathan. "What if, instead of trying to save the ranch legally, we make him regret coming after it in the first place?" Nathan's expression shifted from despair to something darker. "What are you suggesting?" "I don't know yet, but there's got to be something he values more than this property. Some pressure point we can hit that makes continuing not worth the cost." "That's dangerous talk, Eleanor. You're talking about going after a man with resources and men and no conscience. I'm talking about survival. Same thing I've been doing my whole life." Eleanor stood. "Sleep on it. Tomorrow we start looking for weaknesses. Everyone has them." She went to check on Maya, who'd somehow slept through everything, her small body curled peacefully under blankets. Eleanor smoothed her daughter's hair and felt the familiar terror of having something precious to protect. Something that could be taken away. She wouldn't let that happen. Not again. Not ever. The next morning brought unexpected help from an unexpected source. Eleanor was in the garden when she heard a wagon approaching. She looked up to see Rebecca Watts climbing down, her baby still on her hip, her face nervous but determined. "Ms. Cross, I hope you don't mind me coming unannounced." "Not at all." Eleanor wiped dirt from her hands. "Can I offer you coffee?" "That'd be nice. Thank you." They sat at the kitchen table while Rebecca bounced her baby and gathered courage. Finally, she said, "I told my husband about your situation, about Brewer and the debts, and he told me something I thought you should know." Eleanor leaned forward. "Go on." "Brewer's been doing this all over the county, buying up debts, forcing people off their land, but there's a pattern. He only goes after properties with water rights." Rebecca shifted the baby. "Your ranch here, it's got the best water access in 50 miles. Creek runs year-round, never dries up even in drought. That's what Brewer really wants, not the land, the water." Nathan had entered silently and was listening from the doorway. "Why does he need water rights?" "Because he's planning to build a cattle operation bigger than anything Montana's ever seen. But cattle need water, and every property he controls means less water for everyone else." Rebecca looked between them. "My husband thinks Brewer's trying to create a monopoly. Control enough water, you control who can ranch and who can't." Eleanor's mind started racing. "If that's true, if we can prove he's deliberately monopolizing resources—" "It's still legal," Nathan interrupted. "Ruthless, but legal. Property rights include water rights." "But it gives us leverage." Eleanor turned to Rebecca. "Who else has he done this to? Who else has lost their land to Brewer's debt schemes?" Rebecca rattled off 6 names. Eleanor recognized 2 of them, families who'd passed through town destitute, heading east with everything they owned in a wagon. Broken people with nowhere left to go. "Would any of them testify? Tell their stories?" Eleanor asked. "Maybe, if they thought it would matter, but most are too scared or too ashamed." Rebecca stood. "I should get back. My husband doesn't know I came. He's sympathetic, but he's not ready to openly oppose Brewer. Not yet." "Thank you for this, for taking the risk." Eleanor walked her to the door. "Tell your husband we appreciate allies, even quiet ones." After Rebecca left, Nathan and Eleanor looked at each other across the kitchen. "She gave us something," Eleanor said. "Not sure what yet, but something. A pattern, names, proof that we're not the only ones." Nathan poured himself more coffee. "But I don't see how that helps. Can't sue a man for being ruthless if he's staying inside the law." "No, but we can make noise, get people talking, make this about more than just our ranch." Eleanor's mind was working fast now, fitting pieces together. What if we went to the territorial governor, made this about monopolistic practices that hurt settlement and development? Nathan looked skeptical. "Governor's in Helena, 3-day ride, and he's got bigger problems than one rancher's debt troubles." "Maybe, but if we frame it right, if we show this is about water access and territorial development and fair competition," Eleanor stopped. "We need documentation. Letters from the families Brewer destroyed, records of his property acquisitions, something that shows pattern and intent." "That could take weeks. We've got 2.5. "Then we work fast." Eleanor grabbed paper and pencil from the drawer. "I'll write to the families Rebecca mentioned. You ride to the land office, get records of Brewer's purchases over the last 5 years. We meet back here tomorrow and figure out what we have." Nathan studied her with something between admiration and concern. "You really think this could work?" "I think it's better than sitting here waiting to lose." Eleanor met his eyes. "And I think if we're going down, we go down fighting hard enough to leave marks." A smile tugged at Nathan's mouth, the first real smile Eleanor had seen from him. "Sarah would have liked you. You've got her kind of stubbornness." "Is that a compliment?" "Highest one I know how to give." They split up, Nathan riding to the county seat while Eleanor composed careful letters to strangers, asking them to relive their worst moments for the slim chance of justice. Maya played nearby, unaware that her entire future depended on whether broken people could find the courage to speak truth to power. 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Nathan returned with property records showing Brewer had acquired 17 parcels in 5 years, every single one with water access. Eleanor received 2 responses to her letters, both families willing to describe what Brewer had done to them, but neither willing to testify in person. Too afraid. Too beaten down. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Eleanor was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by papers when she heard horses. Multiple horses. Her stomach dropped. Through the window, she saw Brewer and 4 men riding into the yard, moving with the casual confidence of people who knew they held all the power. Nathan was in the barn. Eleanor stood and walked to the door, her heart hammering. Behind her, Maya asked, "Mama? Is it the bad man again?" "Stay inside, baby. Don't come out." Brewer dismounted and smiled at Eleanor with all the warmth of a snake eyeing a mouse. "Ms. Cross. Still here, I see. Thought you might have run by now." "Why would I run? This is my home." "Your home," Brewer laughed. "You hear that, boys? The whore thinks she's got a home." He climbed the porch steps, invading Eleanor's space deliberately. "Let me explain something about homes, sweetheart. Homes belong to people who can pay for them. You're just squatting on property that's about to be mine." Nathan emerged from the barn carrying a rifle. "Get off my porch, Brewer." "Or what? You'll shoot me like you almost did last time." Brewer didn't even turn around. "We both know you won't. Because you're weak, Hale. Broken. Men like you don't fight. You just fold. Try me." Brewer finally turned, his smile widening. "You know what? I think I will." He gestured to his men. "Boys, collect what's ours." 2 of the men dismounted and headed for the barn. Nathan raised the rifle. "Don't take another step." "You gonna shoot unarmed men for walking across a yard? Because that's murder, Hale. And murder gets you hanged." Brewer's voice was casual, conversational. "But go ahead. Prove you've got the backbone everyone says you lost when your family died." Eleanor watched Nathan's face and saw the exact moment when his control started slipping, saw the rage building, the grief transforming into violence, the desperate need to hurt something the way he'd been hurt. His finger moved to the trigger. She did the only thing she could think of. She stepped off the porch and walked directly toward Brewer's men, putting herself between them and Nathan's rifle. "Eleanor, get out of the way!" Nathan's voice cracked with strain. "No!" Eleanor kept walking until she was close enough to touch Brewer's men. "You want to get to that barn? You go through me first." The men hesitated, looking to Brewer for instruction. He studied Eleanor with renewed interest. "You've got nerve, I'll give you that, but nerve doesn't pay debts. Neither does theft, which is what you're doing." Eleanor's voice rang clear across the yard. "You inflated legitimate debt to force a sale. That's extortion. And when people find out what you're really after, the water rights, the monopoly you're building, they're going to ask questions, uncomfortable questions." Brewer's smile flickered. "Nobody's going to ask anything, because nobody cares about one failed rancher." "Maybe not one, but what about 17? Eleanor pulled folded papers from her pocket, the property records Nathan had gathered. 17 families in 5 years, every single property with water access. That's not business, Mr. Brewer. That's a pattern, and patterns interest territorial governors. You went to Helena. For the first time, uncertainty crossed Brewer's face. Eleanor hadn't been to Helena, couldn't afford the trip, but she let the lie hang there, let him wonder. I did what I needed to do to protect what's mine. Brewer's expression hardened. You're bluffing. The governor doesn't care about local debt disputes. Try me, Eleanor echoed Nathan's words back at him. Because if you think I won't make noise, won't fight, won't burn everything down rather than hand it to you quietly, you don't know what desperate women are capable of. Silence stretched across the yard. Brewer's men shifted uncomfortably. Nathan held the rifle steady, waiting. Eleanor stood her ground, every muscle screaming at her to run, but her face showing nothing but cold determination. Finally, Brewer laughed, but it sounded forced. End of the month. $3,500 or this place is mine, along with everything on it. He looked past Eleanor to Nathan. And next time, Hale, I won't come asking. I'll come taking. He remounted his horse and rode out, his men following. Eleanor didn't move until they were completely out of sight, and then her legs gave out. She sat down hard in the dirt, shaking so violently her teeth chattered. Nathan was beside her in seconds, pulling her up, steadying her. That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever seen. I didn't know what else to do. You were going to shoot him. I was. Nathan's voice was rough. I wanted to kill him, still want to, and you stopped me. Because killing him would have destroyed you, destroyed us, destroyed everything. Eleanor leaned against him, too exhausted to maintain any distance. I can't let that happen, Nathan. Can't let you throw your life away on revenge. Nathan's arms came around her, holding her with a desperation that had nothing to do with protection and everything to do with connection. You keep saving me, he said quietly, even when I don't want to be saved. Someone has to. Eleanor pulled back to look at his face. You saved me first, saved Maya. This is just returning the favor. It's more than that. Nathan's hand came up to her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. You know it's more than that. Eleanor did know, had known for weeks but hadn't let herself acknowledge it. The way her heart lifted when she heard his footsteps. The way she noticed details about him, the gray at his temples, the careful way he handled broken things, the rare smiles that transformed his face. The way this ranch had stopped being shelter and become home specifically because he was in it. Nathan, Maya's voice interrupted from the porch. Mama, are you okay? Eleanor stepped back, the moment breaking. I'm fine, baby, just talking. But when her eyes met Nathan's, the conversation continued silently. Later they promised each other, when this is over, when we're safe, if they survived that long. That night, after Maya was asleep, Nathan and Eleanor sat at the kitchen table going through their options one more time. They had documentation of Brewer's pattern. They had two families willing to write statements. They had leverage, but not enough. Not yet. We're missing something, Eleanor said, staring at the papers spread before them. Some piece that makes this all come together. Nathan rubbed his face tiredly. Or we're grasping at straws because the alternative is too awful to accept. Maybe. Eleanor gathered the papers into a pile. But I'd rather grasp at straws than give up. A knock on the door startled them both. Nathan grabbed his rifle while Eleanor moved to the window. A single rider stood in the yard. Not Brewer, someone smaller, wearing a hat pulled low. Nathan opened the door carefully. The rider looked up, and Eleanor recognized Rebecca Watson's husband, Thomas. He looked terrified but determined. Mr. Hale, Ms. Cross, I can't stay long. My wife doesn't know I came. He dismounted quickly. Brewer's planning something. Heard him talking at the feed store today. He's going to have the sheriff serve papers declaring you in default early. Says he's got a judge who'll rule you missed payment deadlines you didn't know existed. When? Nathan's voice was tight. 3 days. Maybe 4. Thomas twisted his hat in his hands. I'm sorry. I wish I could do more. But if Brewer finds out I came here, he'll destroy me too. You've done more than you know, Eleanor said. Thank you. Thomas nodded and rode off quickly, disappearing into the darkness. Nathan closed the door and leaned against it. 3 days. We're out of time. Eleanor's mind was racing. 3 days wasn't enough to get to Helena, wasn't enough to build a legal case, wasn't enough to find $200 for a lawyer. But maybe it was enough for something else. What if we don't fight him legally? She said slowly. What if we fight him publicly? I don't follow. Brewer's power comes from operating quietly, crushing people one at a time before anyone notices the pattern. But what if we make it loud? Make it public. Get everyone talking about what he's doing. Eleanor stood, pacing. The town meeting. There's one in 4 days, isn't there? Everyone attends? Most people, yes. But Eleanor, that town hates us. They're not going to listen. They might, if we frame it right, if we make it about their futures, not just ours. Eleanor's hands were shaking with the audacity of what she was proposing. Rebecca said some people are starting to question Brewer, to worry about his monopoly. What if we give them facts? Show them exactly what he's building. Make them see that today it's us, tomorrow it's them. Nathan looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. That's insane. Brewer will be there. His men. They'll never let us speak. Then we make them. Eleanor grabbed his hands. This is it, Nathan. Our last chance. We go to that town meeting, we tell everyone exactly what Silas Brewer is doing, and we make enough noise that he can't silence us quietly. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but at least we'll have tried. Nathan searched her face, and Eleanor saw the moment he decided to believe her, to believe that two broken people could stand against power and have a chance at winning. "All right," he said. "We make noise. We fight back. We do this together." "Together?" Eleanor agreed. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Eleanor drafted a speech, revised it, redrafted it, trying to find words that would penetrate the town's contempt and reach whatever decency remained. Nathan gathered more documentation, more evidence, more proof of Brewer's systematic destruction of families. Maya sensed the tension and stayed quiet, helping where she could, asking no questions. The night before the town meeting, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She stood at the window watching stars, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. Brewer could have them arrested for slander, could have them physically removed, could simply buy the audience's loyalty with promises and threats. But they had to try. Because surrender wasn't survival. It was just dying slowly. Nathan appeared beside her, silent as always. "Having second thoughts?" "Dozens, but I'm doing it anyway." "You're the bravest person I've ever met." Nathan's voice was quiet but certain. "Sarah was brave. But you've survived things that would have broken most people, and you're still fighting." "Don't have much choice. It's fight or die." "You always have a choice. You chose to stay, chose to help me, chose to risk everything for a ranch that isn't even yours." Nathan turned her to face him. "Why? Tell me the real reason." Eleanor looked at his face in the starlight, this man who'd saved her daughter's life, who'd given her work and dignity and a home, who'd shown her that kindness could exist without transaction. And she told him the truth. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about the ranch. It became about you, about us, about the family we're building, even if we're too scared to call it that. She touched his face gently. "I'm fighting for you, Nathan, for Maya, for the future we could have if we're brave enough to reach for it." Nathan kissed her then, soft and desperate, and full of 3 years of grief transforming into hope. Eleanor kissed him back, tasting salt from tears she hadn't realized she was crying, feeling the wall around her heart finally, completely crumble. When they pulled apart, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "If we survive tomorrow." "When we survive tomorrow," Eleanor corrected. "When we survive tomorrow, I want to do this right. Want to marry you. Make this real. Give Maya a father who will protect her. Build something that lasts." His voice broke. "If you'll have me." Eleanor laughed through her tears. "You're asking me this now, the night before we might lose everything?" "Especially now. Because I've learned that waiting for the right moment means missing all of them." Nathan pulled back to look at her. "Sarah taught me that. And you've reminded me." "Then yes," Eleanor whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build a life with you. Yes to all of it." They stood there holding each other while the night stretched around them. Two people who'd been broken in different ways, finding wholeness in their combined damage. Tomorrow, they'd face Brewer, and the town, and whatever came after. But tonight they had this: hope and love and the fierce determination to protect what they'd built. It would have to be enough. Morning came too quickly, pale light spreading across the grassland like spilled milk. Eleanor woke in Nathan's arms, the warmth of his body against hers still startling in its newness, its rightness. For a moment, she let herself exist in that space between sleep and waking, where yesterday's promise felt solid and today's danger seemed distant. Then Maya stirred in the next room and reality crashed back. Nathan's eyes opened, finding hers immediately. "You ready for this?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." They rose and moved through morning rituals with practiced efficiency, though everything felt weighted with significance. Eleanor dressed in Sarah's best church dress, the fabric soft from years of wear but still dignified. Nathan put on clean clothes, his movements careful, deliberate. Maya watched them both with wide eyes, sensing the importance without understanding it. "Mama, why are you dressed fancy?" "Because today we're going to town to talk to people, to try to save our home." Eleanor knelt beside her daughter. "You're going to stay with Mrs. Watts. She's going to keep you safe while we're gone." Maya's lip trembled. "I want to stay with you." "I know, baby, but this is grown-up business. Might get loud and scary. I need you somewhere safe." Eleanor pulled her close. "Can you be brave for me?" Maya nodded against her shoulder, and Eleanor felt her heart break and mend simultaneously. This child had already been through too much, had already learned too young that the world was hard and safety was temporary. But if today worked, if they somehow pulled this off, maybe Maya could have a childhood where fear wasn't the background noise of every moment. They dropped Maya at the Watts house on the edge of town. Rebecca answered the door looking nervous but determined. "Thomas told me what you're planning," she said quietly. "You're either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both." Eleanor handed Maya over reluctantly. "Thank you for this. For everything. Just come back safe." Rebecca closed the door, and Eleanor watched through the window as Maya was led inside, away from whatever was about to happen. The town hall sat at the center of the main street, a two-story building that served as church, meeting house, and occasional courthouse. People were already gathering, their faces curious and hostile in equal measure. Eleanor felt their stares like physical blows as she and Nathan climbed down from the wagon. "Well, well," a voice called out. "Look who decided to show their faces." Jacob Miller stood on the hall steps, his bulk blocking the entrance, his expression radiating smug satisfaction. "Thought you two would have run by now. Heard Brewer's got papers ready to take that ranch today." Nathan's jaw tightened, but Eleanor touched his arm gently. "We're here for the town meeting, Mr. Miller, same as everyone else. Meetings for town residents, you don't qualify. I pay taxes on ranch property within town limits. That qualifies me." Nathan's voice was level but hard. "You going to bar a taxpayer from public proceedings?" Miller's face reddened, but he stepped aside. "Fine, come in. Watch Brewer take everything you got. Should be entertaining." The hall was already half full, people settling into seats, talking in clusters. Conversation died when Eleanor and Nathan entered. They walked to the front and took seats near the side, close enough to be visible but not so close as to seem presumptuous. Eleanor's hands shook, so she folded them in her lap and focused on breathing. Silas Brewer sat in the front row, surrounded by his men, looking relaxed and confident. When he saw Eleanor and Nathan, he smiled and tipped his hat in mock courtesy. The gesture said everything. He'd already won, and this was just theater. The meeting started with routine business. Road repairs, budget allocations, complaints about loose livestock. Eleanor barely heard any of it, too focused on the speech folded in her pocket, the words she'd practiced until they felt like a prayer. Nathan sat rigid beside her, his presence the only thing keeping her from bolting. Finally, the mayor, a thin man named Cartwright, who owed Brewer money for his dry goods store, called for new business. "Anyone got matters to bring before the town?" Eleanor stood before she could lose her nerve. "I do." Cartwright looked surprised, then annoyed. "Ms. Cross, this really isn't the place." "For what? For citizens to address concerns about monopolistic practices that affect everyone here?" Eleanor's voice carried clearly. "I think that's exactly what town meetings are for." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Brewer's smile widened like a cat watching a mouse walk into a trap. "You got 1 minute," Cartwright said. "Then sit down." Eleanor walked to the front, her legs steady despite the terror flooding her system. She pulled out her papers and looked at the faces staring back at her. Hostile, curious, contemptuous, bored. Somewhere in that crowd were people like Rebecca Watts, people who were starting to question Brewer's dominance. She had to reach them. "My name is Eleanor Cross. Most of you know me as the desperate woman who begged for food in Miller's store. The woman with no husband and a sick child. The woman you've judged and dismissed and wanted gone." She paused, letting that sink in. "And you're right to wonder about me. I made mistakes. I trusted the wrong man. I ended up alone with a child to feed and no resources except my own will to survive. I'm exactly the kind of person this town was built to exclude." She saw confusion on some faces, uncertainty on others. Good. She'd caught them off balance. But here's what you don't know. 17 families in the last 5 years have lost their land the same way Nathan Hale is about to lose his ranch. 17 families who found themselves drowning in debt they couldn't pay, facing a man who offered to buy them out for pennies on the dollar. Eleanor held up her documents. 17 properties, and every single one had something in common: year-round water access. Now she had their attention. Farmers knew water, knew its value, knew that controlling water meant controlling everything. Silas Brewer has been systematically acquiring every property with reliable water rights in this county, not because he wants the land, because he wants the water. And once he controls enough of it, he controls who can ranch, who can farm, who can survive here at all. Brewer stood, his expression still calm but his eyes hard. "This is slander, Cartwright. She's got no proof of anything except her own desperation. I've got property records from the county seat." Eleanor held up the papers. "I've got statements from families Brewer destroyed. I've got documentation showing how he inflates legitimate debt with compounding interest until payment becomes impossible, then swoops in to buy distressed property at a fraction of its value." "That's called business," Brewer said. "Legal business. People who can't pay their debts lose their property. That's how the world works. It's also how monopolies work." Eleanor turned back to the crowd. "Today, it's Nathan Hale's ranch. Tomorrow, it might be your farm, your store, your livelihood, because once Brewer controls the water, he controls all of you. And you'll pay whatever he demands or you'll lose everything just like those 17 families did." Uncomfortable shifting in the seats now. People glancing at each other, doing mental calculations about their own debts, their own vulnerabilities. Thomas Watt stood from the back. Eleanor's heart leaped. He'd promised to stay silent, to protect himself. But here he was, risking everything. "She's telling the truth," Thomas said, his voice shaking but clear. "Brewer came to me last month, said he'd bought paper on my feed store, wanted to buy me out. When I refused, he said the interest would keep building until I had no choice." He looked around at his neighbors. "How many others here have had similar conversations?" Silence. Then slowly, hesitantly, 3 other hands went up, then 2 more, then another. Brewer's expression finally cracked, fury bleeding through. "This is ridiculous. Cartwright, shut this down. Now." But Cartwright was looking at the raised hands, at the faces of people he'd known for years, and something shifted in his own expression. "Let her finish." Eleanor felt a surge of hope so intense it almost knocked her down. She pressed forward. "I'm not asking you to like me. I'm not asking you to forget that I'm a woman with a questionable past and no husband. I'm asking you to look past me to the pattern, to see what's being built here while you're too busy judging people like me to notice you're next." "This is absurd," Brewer said, his voice rising. "I'm a businessman. I buy property legally. I employ half this town. You want to side with some whore over me?" The word hung in the air, ugly and final. Eleanor felt it like a slap, but refused to flinch. She'd been called worse. What mattered was whether these people could see past the insult to the truth underneath. Nathan stood slowly. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the hall. "My wife died 3 years ago. My son died with her. And for 3 years I've been half dead myself, just going through motions, waiting for it to be over. I didn't care about this ranch or this town or anything except the guilt eating me alive." He moved to stand beside Eleanor. Then Eleanor and her daughter showed up, sick and starving, and I helped them because it was the right thing to do. And slowly, day by day, they reminded me what it means to live instead of just survive. What it means to fight for something that matters. What it means to protect what you love. Nathan turned to face the crowd. "I don't know what you think of Eleanor. Don't much care. But I know what she is. She's brave. She's honest. She's a fighter who survived things that would have broken most of you. And she's telling the truth about Brewer, about what he's building, about the threat he represents to every single person in this room." "You're pathetic, Hale," Brewer spat. "Letting some woman speak for you, letting her make accusations she can't prove." "Can't prove?" Eleanor pulled out another document. "This is a letter from the Territorial Land Office. 17 properties acquired by Silas Brewer in 5 years. Total value at time of purchase, approximately $100,000. Actual price paid, $18,000. You're not a businessman, Mr. Brewer. You're a vulture. And these people deserve to know exactly what you are before you destroy anyone else." Brewer's control finally shattered completely. He lunged toward Eleanor, his hand reaching for her. Nathan stepped between them, his fist connecting with Brewer's jaw in a single clean strike that sent the older man sprawling. Brewer's men surged forward. Nathan grabbed Eleanor and pulled her behind him as the hall erupted into chaos. Men shouting, chairs scraping, someone calling for the sheriff. Eleanor's careful plan dissolved into violence and noise. Then a gunshot split the air. Everyone froze. The sheriff stood in the doorway, his revolver pointed at the ceiling, his expression disgusted. "Everyone sit down, now!" People obeyed slowly, resentfully. Brewer pulled himself up, wiping blood from his mouth. Nathan kept Eleanor behind him, his body a shield. The sheriff looked around the room. "I've been listening from the back for the last 10 minutes. Heard some interesting things. Now I want to see these documents Ms. Cross mentioned, all of them." Eleanor handed them over with shaking hands. The sheriff read slowly, his expression growing darker. Finally, he looked at Brewer. "This true? You've been buying up debt and forcing sales?" "It's legal," Brewer said. "Talk to my lawyer." "Oh, I will, but right now I'm talking to you." The sheriff held up the papers. 17 properties in 5 years, all with water rights. That's not business, Brewer. That's systematic exploitation. And even if it's technically legal, it stinks. So what? You going to arrest me for making smart investments? No, but I'm going to make sure the territorial governor hears about this, and the federal land office, and anyone else who might be interested in how one man's trying to monopolize natural resources. The sheriff turned to the crowd. You all need to think real hard about whether you want to live in a town controlled by someone like this. Because once he owns enough property, owns enough debt, he owns all of you. Silence settled over the hall. Eleanor could see the calculations happening behind closed faces. Fear warring with self-interest. The desire for safety colliding with the recognition that safety built on someone else's destruction wasn't safety at all. Finally, Rebecca Watts stood. I want to hear from the families Brewer bought out. Want to hear their stories, all of them. Me too, Thomas added. One by one, others voiced agreement. Not everyone, not even half, but enough. Enough that the balance shifted, that Brewer's absolute control cracked just slightly. Cartwright cleared his throat. This meeting is adjourned pending further investigation. Brewer, you and Mr. Hale both are banned from contact until the sheriff sorts this out. Everyone else, go home. We'll reconvene when we have answers. The crowd dispersed slowly, people talking in tight clusters, casting glances at Eleanor and Nathan. Brewer stood alone, his men having mysteriously faded away the moment the sheriff showed interest. His expression promised violence deferred, not abandoned. This isn't over, he said quietly as he passed Eleanor. Not by a long shot. I know, Eleanor replied. But neither are we. He left, and suddenly Eleanor's legs gave out. She sat down hard, adrenaline draining away and leaving her hollow. Nathan knelt beside her. You did it, he said. You actually did it. We did it, together. Eleanor looked at him. But he's right. It's not over. He'll come after us harder now, use everything he has. Let him try. Nathan helped her up. Come on, let's get Maya and go home. They collected Maya from the Watts house and drove back to the ranch in the late afternoon light. Maya chattered about playing with Rebecca's baby, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded. Eleanor let her daughter's voice wash over her, grateful for the innocence, the normalcy, the reminder that not everything was battle and crisis. At the ranch, while Maya fed chickens, Eleanor and Nathan sat on the porch watching the sun sink toward the horizon. What happens now? Eleanor asked. I don't know. Sheriff investigates. Governor maybe gets involved. Brewer finds new ways to attack. Nathan took her hand. But we're still here, still fighting. For how long? He's got resources we don't have, patience, power. He's also got enemies now, people asking questions, doubt creeping in where there used to be certainty. Nathan squeezed her hand. We planted seeds today, Eleanor. Maybe they grow into something. Maybe they don't. But at least we tried. They sat in silence as darkness gathered. Maya came running up, breathless and happy. Mama, can we have chicken for dinner? I helped gather eggs and there's so many. Sure, baby. Chicken sounds perfect. Eleanor went inside to cook, moving through familiar motions, her mind still processing everything that had happened. They'd stood in front of the whole town and told the truth. Had been called names, threatened, nearly attacked, and somehow they'd survived. Had maybe even won something, though what exactly remained unclear. Nathan came in carrying wood for the fire. Eleanor? She looked up from cutting vegetables. I meant what I said. About marrying you, building something real. He set down the wood. I know we're in the middle of a war with Brewer. Know everything's uncertain, but I don't want to wait anymore. Don't want to postpone living for some perfect moment that might never come. Eleanor set down her knife. What are you saying? I'm saying let's get married, this week, soon as we can find someone to do it. Nathan crossed to her. I'm saying I love you. Love Maya. Want to be a family officially, legally, completely. Want to wake up every morning knowing we chose each other. What do you say? Eleanor looked at this man who'd saved her daughter's life, who'd given her work and dignity and a home, who'd shown her that love could grow from the ruins of grief. This man who'd stood beside her against power and violence and contempt. This man who wanted her, damaged and desperate and difficult as she was. Yes, she whispered. Yes, let's get married. Let's build this life together. Let's be brave enough to claim happiness even when the world says we don't deserve it. Nathan kissed her there in the kitchen with Maya humming nearby and chicken roasting in the oven and the future still uncertain but no longer quite so dark. They had each other. They had this ranch. They had hope that maybe, just maybe, the truth was enough to build on. The next 3 weeks unfolded in strange suspension. The sheriff's investigation uncovered more debt manipulation than even Eleanor had suspected. 8 more families came forward with stories of Brewer's tactics. The territorial governor sent a representative to review the case. Legal challenges were filed. Counter-challenges filed against those. Through it all, Eleanor and Nathan worked the ranch and waited. They married on a Tuesday afternoon with just Maya and the Watts family as witnesses, a simple ceremony that felt more binding than any elaborate church wedding. Eleanor took Nathan's name and cried when the judge pronounced them husband and wife. Maya called Nathan Papa for the first time that evening, and Nathan had to leave the table to compose himself. They were a family now, legal and binding and real. Then one evening in late September, as the first hints of autumn touched the grassland, the sheriff rode out to the ranch. Eleanor's heart sank when she saw him. Official visits rarely brought good news. Don't look so worried, Ms. Hale, the sheriff said, dismounting. I actually got good news for once. Nathan appeared from the barn. What kind of good news? The kind where Brewer's lawsuit got dismissed. Judge ruled his debt calculations were fraudulent. You still owe the original $1,800, but that's payable over 5 years at reasonable interest. The sheriff pulled out papers. And the governor's office is opening an investigation into monopolistic practices. Brewer's looking at federal charges. Eleanor felt like she might faint. We get to keep the ranch? You get to keep the ranch. Brewer's barred from contact with you or any of the other families he targeted. He violates that. He goes to jail. The sheriff handed Nathan the papers. You folks did a good thing, standing up like you did. Made a lot of people start asking questions they should have asked years ago. After he left, Eleanor and Nathan just stood there holding each other in the yard while Maya played nearby. They'd won. Against all odds, against power and money and systemic corruption, they'd actually won. I can't believe it, Eleanor whispered. I keep thinking I'll wake up and this'll be a dream. If it's a dream, I don't want to wake up. Nathan pulled back to look at her. We did this. You did this. We did it together. Eleanor touched his face. We saved each other. That night they celebrated with a proper dinner, Maya chattering excitedly about staying forever, about having a real home, about Papa teaching her to ride horses. Eleanor watched her daughter's joy and felt something in her chest crack open, all the fear and desperation and survival instinct that had defined her for so long finally releasing its grip. She was safe. Maya was safe. They had a home and a future and a man who loved them both. It was almost too much happiness to hold. The following months brought changes. Brewer left town under indictment, his empire collapsing as investigations revealed the full extent of his manipulations. Several families got their land back, others received compensation. The town slowly transformed, becoming less hostile, more willing to see Eleanor as a person rather than a symbol of moral failure. Not everyone changed. Miller still sneered when she came to his store. Some women still whispered when she passed, but enough people softened that life became bearable, then almost pleasant. Eleanor hired a woman from one of the displaced families to help with the house and garden. Together, they transformed Sarah's neglected space into something productive and beautiful. The ranch began to thrive under Nathan's renewed attention. Maya started school and made friends. Life developed rhythms and patterns that felt stable, permanent, real. One evening the following spring, Eleanor stood in the garden watching Maya help Nathan mend fence. The child was laughing, Nathan was patient, and the scene was so ordinary, so perfectly domestic, that Eleanor had to stop and just absorb it. This was her life now. This peace, this family, this home. Nathan looked up and caught her watching. He said something to Maya, who ran off to feed chickens, then walked over to Eleanor. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how far we've come, so about how close we came to losing everything." Eleanor leaned into him. "About how grateful I am that you stopped that day in town, that you saw us and decided we were worth saving. You saved yourself. I just provided the space for you to do it." Nathan wrapped his arms around her. "And you saved me right back. Reminded me that life doesn't end when grief begins, that there's still room for love and hope and fighting for what matters." "We saved each other," Eleanor repeated. "That's the truth of it." They stood there as the sun set over the grassland, painting everything gold and amber. Maya's laughter drifted from the chicken coop. The cottonwoods rustled in the evening breeze. Somewhere a horse whinnied. All the sounds of home, of safety, of a life built from the wreckage of what came before. Eleanor thought about the woman she'd been, desperate, starving, walking through heat with a dying child. Thought about standing in Miller's store begging for mercy she'd never receive. Thought about the moment Nathan's horse had stopped behind her, interrupting what had felt like an ending. It hadn't been an ending at all. It had been the beginning of everything that mattered. "I love you," she told Nathan. Simple words for a complicated truth. "I love you too." He kissed the top of her head. "You and Maya both. My family." "Your family," Eleanor agreed. They walked back to the house together as the darkness gathered, Maya running ahead to light the lamps. Inside, the table was set for dinner. The fire crackled in the hearth. Everything was warm and safe and exactly as it should be. Eleanor had spent so long surviving that she'd forgotten what living felt like. But here, in this house with this man and this child, she was finally, truly alive. Not just enduring each day, but embracing it. Not just protecting what little she had, but building something larger, stronger, better. The heat of that Montana summer was long past, but its lessons remained. That mercy could arrive unexpected on horseback. That broken people could become whole through the act of healing each other. That love could grow in the space left by grief. That fighting back, even when victory seemed impossible, was always worth the cost. Eleanor had walked through fire to get here, had faced down poverty, contempt, violence, and power, had risked everything on the belief that truth mattered, that dignity mattered, that standing up mattered even when standing up felt futile. And she'd been right. Not because the world was just or fair or kind, but because sometimes, if you fought hard enough, if you refused to surrender, if you found people worth fighting beside, sometimes you won. Not every story ended this way. Eleanor knew that, knew she'd been lucky, blessed, saved by a confluence of factors that could have easily gone differently. Other women in her position hadn't been so fortunate. Other families had lost everything and found no mercy waiting in the wings. But this was her story, and it ended not with desperation, but with hope. Not with loss, but with gain. Not with an ending, but with a beginning that stretched forward into a future she'd never dared imagine possible. That night, after Maya was asleep and the house was quiet, Eleanor stood at the window looking out over the ranch that was now legally, permanently hers. Nathan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I'm home," Eleanor said simply. Finally, completely home. And it was true. This ranch with its painful history and hard-won future. This man who'd learned to love again through the act of protecting her. This daughter who'd been dying and now ran laughing through summer grass. This life they'd built together from nothing but determination and desperate courage. It was home, It was family. It was everything she'd needed and more than she'd ever hoped for. The heat of mercy had brought her here. And here, in the cool Montana evening, with her family safe and her future secure, Eleanor Cross, now Eleanor Hale, finally let herself rest.